I had been driving for hours. I was on my way home from visiting my sister in Nashville, heading back to Louisiana, when a bad storm rolled in. The kind of storm where your windshield wipers are useless and you can barely see the road in front of you. My GPS was already spotty in the rural back roads I'd taken to avoid traffic, but when the rain really started coming down, I knew I needed to pull over somewhere safe. That's when I remembered. My old college roommate Jason lived in this area. I hadn't seen him in years, just the occasional Instagram like or birthday message. But last I checked, he had moved to a house out here in Tennessee, not far from where I was. On a whim, I sent him a message. "Hey man, crazy storm out here. I think I'm near your place. Mind if I crash for the night?" I didn't expect an immediate response, but within a minute my phone lit up. "Dude, yeah, of course, come by. I'll send you my address." The drive to his place took about 20 minutes, the road slick with rain, my knuckles tight on the wheel. Jason's house was on a secluded road, surrounded by trees. When I pulled up, I barely made out the shape of the two-story farmhouse through the sheets of rain. The house was old but well-maintained, white wooden siding, a wraparound porch, and dim yellow light glowing from inside. Jason was already at the door when I got out of the car, waving me in. We shook hands, did the whole long time no see thing, and within minutes, we were sitting in his living room, drinking whiskey and catching up. The storm outside howled against the windows, but inside everything was warm and comfortable. "You picked a hell of a night to visit," Jason laughed, pouring another drink. "Storm like this, roads can get washed out. You're probably stuck till morning." "Fine by me," I said, already feeling the weight of exhaustion from the drive and the whiskey. Jason grinned. "I'll set you up in the guest room." The guest room was at the end of a narrow hallway upstairs. Jason led me there, flipping on the light. It was simple: queen-size bed, wooden dresser, a window that looked out over the dark treetops. "Bathroom's just down the hall," Jason said. "If you need anything, just holler." I thanked him, and he left me to settle in. The room smelled faintly of dust, like it hadn't been used in a while. The sheets were clean, though, and the bed was surprisingly comfortable. I checked my phone, barely any service. The rain outside had softened to a steady patter. I turned off the light and rolled onto my side, drifting into sleep almost immediately. I woke up to a sound, a slow, deliberate creaking. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the old house, but then I heard it again. Closer. I blinked, adjusting to the dark. The only light in the room was the soft blue glow of the moon filtering through the storm clouds outside. The air felt off, stale. Then, in the corner near the dresser, I saw it. A tall, dark shape. It was standing there, still as a statue. For a split second, my brain tried to rationalize it. A coat rack? A shadow? But there was no coat rack in the room. The shape was humanoid, tall, thin, watching. My breath caught in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself I was half asleep, that it was a trick of the light. When I opened them again, it was closer. Just a few steps from the bed now. A bolt of cold terror shot through me. I scrambled for the lamp on the nightstand, my fingers fumbling against the switch. The moment the light flicked on, nothing. The corner was empty. My heart was hammering. I sat up, swallowing hard, scanning the room. Nothing. Just the dresser, the window, the rain outside. I let out a shaky breath, forcing a laugh. "Jesus," I muttered. I was just overtired. Maybe the whiskey hadn't helped. I turned off the light and lay back down, convincing myself I had imagined the whole thing. But as I drifted off, I swore I could still feel something there, watching. The next time I woke up, it was to the faintest sound. A creak. Not just any creak, though. This one was slow, deliberate, like something heavy shifting on old floorboards. I sat up immediately, my senses on high alert. The room was still dark, except for the same moonlight filtering through the window. And there it was again. The shape. This time, it was closer. I could barely make it out in the dim light, but there was no mistaking the dark silhouette standing at the edge of the bed. My heart raced as panic set in. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the shape was gone. I shot out of bed, nearly tripping over the blankets as I rushed to the door. My head was spinning from the alcohol, and every inch of my body screamed to get out of that room. But my legs were shaking as I staggered down the hallway to Jason's room. I knocked once, then barged in without waiting. Jason was still asleep, snoring heavily. I shook him awake, my voice trembling. "Jason," I said, louder than I intended. "Wake up, man. Something's in the room." He groggily sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I saw something. It was standing right there by the bed." I pointed to the empty space beside the bed where the shape had been. It was tall, thin, just standing there, watching me. Jason blinked at me, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes, I'm serious. It's gone now, but it was there. I saw it." He stared at me for a long moment, as if processing what I said. Then he sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. Okay, hold on. Let me check the house," he muttered. He threw off the covers and stood, already heading toward the door. I followed closely behind him, my heart still racing. Jason didn't seem concerned, though. In fact, he seemed more annoyed than anything else. We searched the entire house, every room, every closet. Nothing. No strange figures. No signs of forced entry. Just an old, quiet house. Jason looked at me, his expression hardening. "Are you sure you're not just seeing things? Maybe it's the alcohol." "No," I interrupted. "I'm telling you, Jason, I saw it. It was there, and it wasn't a trick of the light. It was like something was standing in the room with me." Jason paused, staring at me like he was trying to decide if I was messing with him. But his face softened after a moment. "You're freaked out because of the storm. And I know you've been driving a long time. Maybe it's all just in your head, man. Let's just go back to bed, okay?" I nodded, though I didn't believe him. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I wasn't imagining it. Jason led me back to the guest room, but the air in the hallway seemed heavier now, colder. I could feel my skin prickling with unease. "I'll leave the light on for you," Jason said as he opened the door. "Get some sleep." I didn't argue. I was too exhausted, too shaken up to think straight. But I wasn't going to sleep in that room again, not after what I'd seen. I grabbed my bag, and Jason, still half asleep, just shook his head as I left the room and made my way down the stairs. The storm had died down by the time I reached the living room. I sat on the couch, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The occasional sound of the wind outside seemed to carry a different tone now. It felt ominous. The couch was uncomfortable, but I couldn't bring myself to go back upstairs. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape, that figure. Was it real? Was it a figment of my imagination? I couldn't decide. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me in that room. The hours passed in a blur, but eventually, the first light of dawn began to creep in through the windows. I couldn't stay another minute. I grabbed my things, feeling the weight of the fear in my chest. Jason was still asleep when I slipped out the door, my heart pounding with every step I took toward the car. The rain had stopped, but the air was still thick with moisture. I didn't want to think about what had happened. I didn't want to admit that maybe, just maybe, there was something to it. But as I pulled away from Jason's house and hit the highway, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. And in that fleeting moment, I swore I saw something standing just inside the window, watching me drive away. But when I looked again, there was nothing. It happened when I was 19 years old. My best friend Jake and I had been planning a camping trip for weeks. We wanted to escape the city for a few days, just the two of us, and experience true wilderness. No campsites, no designated trails, just us, nature, and our tents. Jake had heard about Blackwood Forest, a remote stretch of dense woodland a few hours outside our town. It was supposed to be perfect for solitude. Few people ventured there, and the ones who did always raved about how untouched it felt. It wasn't until later that I learned why it was so untouched. We packed light, just some food, a tent, sleeping bags, and a couple of flashlights. By the time we reached the edge of the forest, the sun was beginning to set. The sky turned a deep orange as we parked the car on a small dirt road leading into the woods. There was no proper parking area, just enough space to leave the car off the main path. We grabbed our backpacks and started walking. The forest was silent. No wind, no birds, just the crunch of leaves under our boots. I remember making a joke about how it felt like we were walking into a horror movie, and Jake laughed it off, but I noticed he kept looking over his shoulder. After about 30 minutes, we found a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. It felt secluded but open enough to see our surroundings. We set up our tent quickly, ate a couple of sandwiches, and sat by a small fire, talking about nothing in particular. That was when we first heard it. A single scream, faint but unmistakable. We both froze. It had come from deep within the woods, far enough away that it was hard to tell if it was human or animal. It was sharp, sudden, and then nothing. Jake stared into the darkness beyond the trees. "Probably just a fox," he muttered, but his voice lacked confidence. I nodded, pretending to believe it. After a while, we decided to call it a night. We crawled into the tent, zipped ourselves in, and turned off the lantern. I lay there, staring at the ceiling of the tent, listening. Then, just as my eyelids grew heavy, I heard it again. Not a scream this time. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps outside our tent. Jake must have heard it too, because I felt him go rigid beside me. The steps circled around us, crunching softly against the forest floor. Not an animal. An animal wouldn't move with such measured steps. I held my breath. Jake whispered, barely audible, "Dude, someone's out there." I reached for my phone, but before I could turn on the screen, we heard another sound. A soft tap, tap, tap against the fabric of the tent. Jake's breathing became shallow. Neither of us moved. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps retreated. Slow at first, then faster, until they faded into the woods. For the next hour, we lay in complete silence, too terrified to speak. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have drifted off. The second night. We woke up to a thick fog blanketing the clearing. The fire had burned out, leaving only smoldering embers. Jake barely touched his breakfast. "We should leave," he muttered. I agreed. But when we stepped out of the tent, something wasn't right. The forest looked different. The trees were wrong, closer together than before, their trunks twisted in unnatural angles. Even worse, our footprints from yesterday were gone, like we had never walked here at all. Jake pulled out his phone to check the GPS, but his face darkened. No signal. I tried mine. Nothing. We weren't lost. We had followed a straight path in, but the more we looked around, the less familiar everything seemed. Then we saw it. Near the tree line, where we hadn't been before, something was hanging from a branch, a wooden effigy, crudely made of sticks and twine, swinging gently in the breeze. Jake cursed under his breath. Did someone put that there last night?" I asked. "Or has it always been there?" The second question was somehow worse. At that moment, I made a decision. We're leaving. Now. We packed our things in record time. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something, someone, watching us. We started back toward the car, following the same path we had come in on. But after 20 minutes of walking, the trees seemed to loop around us. Then we saw the same clearing again. Our tent. Our burnt-out fire. Jake went pale. No, that's not possible. We had walked in a straight line. There was no way we had circled back. No way. And then, from the tree line, we heard it again. That same scream. Closer this time. Much, much closer. The third night. I don't remember how, but somehow the day passed. We tried everything. Walking in different directions, marking trees, using the compass on Jake's watch. Every time we ended up back at the clearing. The sun set. We had no choice but to stay another night. Jake wouldn't speak. He sat by the fire, staring into the darkness. I was too exhausted to panic anymore. Then, at midnight, the footsteps returned. But this time, it wasn't one person. Multiple sets of footsteps moved around our tent, slow and methodical. Tap, tap, tap. Something brushed against the fabric. Then came the whispers. Too soft to understand. Too many voices at once. I gripped my flashlight, but Jake grabbed my arm. "Don't," he whispered. I understood why. If we turned on the light, we'd see them. We stayed frozen, listening as the footsteps circled our tent for hours. The whispers never stopped. Then, just before dawn, the noises vanished. The moment the first light broke through the trees, we grabbed our bags and ran. We didn't care about direction anymore. We just ran. And somehow, we found the car. It was parked exactly where we had left it. The road was there, just as before. The forest behind us looked normal again. We didn't speak the entire drive home. The aftermath. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. I started researching Blackwood Forest. What I found chilled me to the bone. Years ago, a group of hikers had gone missing there. Their bodies were never found, but search teams reported strange disturbances, unexplained noises, lost time, and unrecognizable symbols carved into the trees. Even worse, in local folklore, the forest was said to shift, that once you entered deep enough, it could trap you inside. Forever. I haven't spoken to Jake much since then. Neither of us wants to talk about what happened, but sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I swear I can still hear those whispers.